There's sometimes a sort of silly view from climate science deniers who say, hey, even if the world is warming, it's kind of a nice thing, right? Who doesn't like warm days, and more of the world will have them if the planet warms up a little bit. Right now, about 30% of the world's population is at risk of death from extreme heat on at least 20 days of the year. And of course, that's up from the number of days in past years. And there's a new study published in Nature Climate Change that says by the year 2100, we could see 48 to 74% of the world's population exposed to potentially deadly extreme heat on at least 20 days each year. This will be in part because of weather becoming more and more dangerous as a result of climate change. And 48 to 74, 48 is the best case scenario. And that would be if the world drastically cuts greenhouse gas emissions. And that would mean that only half of the world would be at risk of heat death for roughly 20 days per year. The 74% figure, the high part of that range, would be if emissions continue to rise at their current pace. And forget about if emissions accelerate, which they could, then you could see even worse numbers altogether. And the study looked at all available data on past heat-related deaths to figure out, well, what's the threshold between what we consider deadly heat and non-deadly heat and humidity? And humidity is a factor here as well, because the body is less able to sweat in higher humidity, which is sort of our primary the primary way that the body is able to release heat. And obviously, if our body temperature goes up too much, organs can start to malfunction, all sorts of other bad things, complicated things, to quote Donald Trump, start to happen. So if we stay on the road that we're on, about 3/4 of the world's population would be at risk of dying from heat for about 3 weeks per year. Even if we make some big changes, about half of the world's population will still be in that situation. And scientists say, and you don't really need to be a scientist to figure this out, the elderly are at particularly high risk on these really hot days. And as logic would tell you, people living closer to the equator would be most affected in the future. They're already the most affected by this. And unfortunately, those are also some of the poorest parts of the world and least well equipped to deal with medical problems. This includes Africa. This includes in Latin America around the equator. It includes South Asia. And as always, every time you see a report like this, you need to look at it with a critical eye, right? The population is expected to increase more in hotter areas than in colder areas. So climate change aside, that's going to put more people in these areas that are at risk. People also could start dying from cold exposure. Or in other words, we have people that already die from cold exposure, which if it gets a little warmer in those parts of the world, you might see fewer people die from cold exposure, whereas people in other areas are more likely to die from heat exposure. But if and when things get worse, you won't even have to be close to the equator because the region in which this will be a problem is going to grow as the climate warms.
I just think a lot of people look at this and say, well, I'm not even going to be alive in the year 2100, so what does it matter? But if you love your kids and your grandkids, you should care about this. Unfortunately, we have so many people in America, too, who just think that the rapture is going to happen before then. So what does it matter?
I've interviewed some of those people. Yeah. It's hard to have a serious conversation with them. And then some people like to make this argument, Pat, of like, oh, well, but it was really cold today.
Right.
Like, yeah, well, it's Minnesota in January.
Climate
obviously,
versus weather.
Obviously, it was really cold. Even our current president has used that logically fallacious argument before to try to ignore climate science. He once tweeted, a big part of the country, even the southern states, is under massive attack from snow and freezing cold. Global warming, anyone? And this isn't even some hypothetical thing where now no one dies of heat. We already have people dying of heat. All scientists are telling us is the number of people who are going to be at risk of heat death is going to go up.
And I remember that Bernie Sanders was laughed at for saying that the biggest threat to our foreign policy is climate change.
Right.
It seems so incredibly obvious because as resources get more scarce, and some of those resources are essential to our life and our existence, people are going to have to fight for them if you can't get water and food.
Well, water is a big one that we've talked about. And I've done a couple interviews with David Zetland, which are really interesting, and I encourage you to check out on YouTube.